The shower scene from Psycho is one of the most famous scenes in cinema. Between the soundtrack, the storyline, the erroneous innocence of the characters, and the brutal murders, the film grabs your attention from the very beginning and holds on to it throughout the entire film, though it does take you for a bumpy ride. Phoenix office worker Marion Crane is fed up with the way life has treated her. She has to meet her boyfriend Sam in secret because he is in the middle of a divorce. One day, Marion is trusted to bank $40,000 by her employer. Seeing the opportunity to start a new life, Marion leaves town and heads towards Sam in California. Tired after the long drive and caught in a storm, she gets off the main highway and pulls into the Bates Motel, the only place for miles. The hotel is managed by a quiet young man named Norman, who has a special relationship with his mother. After Norman and Marion have dinner, she goes back to her room for a shower, and Norman watches her undress through a hole in the wall. After a minute, Norman goes back up to the house. Then, the famous scene happens. Psycho was refused by many directors, saying it was ghastly and disgusting, but Hitchcock wanted to do it. He wanted to see what he could do with the low-budget horror genre, it being very popular at the time, except Paramount refused to fund the picture, let alone release it. Hitchcock and his agent worked out a deal. If Paramount distributed the picture, he would waive the director's fee, he would fund it himself, and he would only accept 40% of the profits. Hitchcock suspected the picture would cost about $800,000, which was pretty inexpensive at that time. The film was based off the book Psycho by Robert Bloch, but quite a few changes were made for the adaptation. The character in the book, Mary, had her whole head cut off in the shower, whereas in the film, Marion is only stabbed. Also, Mary lives a lot longer in the book, whereas in the film, Marion is killed around the 30-minute mark. And, although Hitchcock had the sense to keep Marion's head on, the motion picture production code still denied the film. They objected to the nudity and the shot of the toilet, and especially the toilet flushing. Also, they said Hitchcock wasn't allowed to show the knife penetrate Marion's skin. The MPPC said the only way he could show her naked is if the shot was through a distant window, a foggy glass door, or a shot above the shoulders showing only her head. Even those shots through a window or foggy glass or just the head were very risky and unheard of, and showing a woman getting stabbed? Out of the question. So how did we get from this to films like The Shining, where we see one bloody scene after another? A lot of what we call classics are actually very violent, but they're universally popular. Movies like The Godfather, Pulp Fiction, Goodfellas, No Country for Old Men, Chinatown, and many others. Some directors are even famous for the amounts of violence in their films, such as Stanley Kubrick, Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese, and many others. As for nudity, although it is extremely common in modern movies, it is still censored, just not as much as it was. Movies like American Beauty, Marathon Man, Out of Sight, and LA Confidential are only a few examples of how much the code has changed to allow more and more mature themes such as nudity.
So, what was your original reaction to the shower scene?
It was shock. And the shock came about, and I even remember that as a result of my original impression, that here was the character, Marion, Marion Crane, interesting name, and she had just decided she was going to return to Phoenix, right?
Yeah.
And she had just decided she was going to try to make right what she had done wrong, remember? And at that moment, she's killed.
Yeah.
That was totally crazy. And also, another thing I remember is that not very much of the film had occurred. And she was the main character. So you thought, well, here he is killing off the main character after about maybe a third of the movie. You knew that there wasn't that much that had elapsed. So you said, how is the story going to continue? And I remember thinking that as well. The shower scene as a piece of cinema, of course, was horrible. It was horrible. And there were gasps of disbelief that it looked so horrendous. I mean, my God. And the music enhanced it, the soundtrack, so it was just totally effective. Of course, it was totally unparalleled. It really was. Hitchcock is, I consider, to be sui generis. He is in a class by himself.
What do you think the legacy of Psycho has been and will continue to be in film?
Well, I would say that it was and I know this term is overused, it is a paradigm changing moment in the history of cinema. After Psycho, no horror film could be the same again. Absolutely. It's one of those, it's something that you can call a moment in which the discourse changes. And after that moment, it is impossible to conceive that the horror genre could return to its original state. Right?
Yeah.
That's what paradigm change is. It is absolutely.
The best example of this progression is the story of serial killer Edward Gein. Ed Gein was a murderer in Wisconsin. He started by robbing graves and skinning bodies. He practiced human taxidermy and necrophilia. He then turned to murder, killing women instead of grave robbing. When the police finally arrested him, they went to search his house and found horrific scenes, masks made of human skin, bowls made of human skulls, and many other creations. This story was made almost directly into a movie 3 times, once in 1960, 1974, and 1991, each time getting more and more vulgar as the regulations got fewer and fewer. Psycho features a quiet male character who turns out to be a murderer, controlled by and obsessed with his dead mother. He kills 2 people throughout the film, both by stabbing. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre features a quiet male character who is also a murderer. He is a cannibal. He kills his victims with a chainsaw, and he wears a mask of human skin. The Silence of the Lambs features 2 important male characters. They are both murderers and both very demented. This film comes frighteningly close to the real story. One character makes a bodysuit of skin, and the other eats his victims. In an article about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and its sequels, the director Tobe Hooper is quoted directly saying the inspiration for the film came from the story of Ed Gein. Norman Bates, Leatherface, Hannibal Lecter, Buffalo Bill. All these characters were ideas based on the story of Ed Gein. Those movies are literally the same story being retold multiple times, and you can see how over time the same story becomes more and more gruesome as the code allows them to be. When Alfred Hitchcock took a stand, the result left a lasting legacy on the horror film industry. In today's films, we see violent deaths galore, and nudity is extremely common, but that is all possible because of Psycho.
I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner. Bye.